All right, good evening, everyone. For those who may not know me, I'm Chris Fowles. I'm the chair of the Select Board. And I just want to take a minute or two just to welcome everybody here tonight. Thank you for coming. It's actually been a better weather night than it might have been, so hopefully it hasn't, impeded anybody to get here. So thanks for coming out. This is going to be quite an exciting event for us, I think. Our first very interactive workshop in terms of a public visioning workshop about what we want to do with the land that we have purchased recently on College Highway. And I'm going to not say the actual address right yet, as you'll find out later on. If you didn't see it, we're having a bit of a naming contest, per se, to see what we can start calling this property. But I want to welcome our colleagues that are going to be facilitating tonight, folks from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission and the consulting firm, the Landscape Planning Group from Dodson and Flinker. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Peter and let him explain what the evening's going to be. But you'll get to play with Legos and no, not quite, but almost.
Almost. Thanks. Can everybody hear me? Great. Yeah, my name's Peter Flinker. I'm the president of Dodson and Flinker. We're a planning firm in downtown Florence. We have an office in one of the old mills across from Cooper's Corner. A little closer? All right. So yeah, we're pretty familiar with Southampton and really glad to be here, but not too close. He's going to fix it. So yeah, this is a really interesting project because it's not too often that the town has really taken control of a property by purchasing it and then deciding how can we arrange different things on there. And so we're really looking at working with you to figure out what's the appropriate use for the site beyond the public safety complex and the senior center. What else could go on that site, or what else needs to be protected on that site to benefit everyone in the town and to make uses that really build on each other's strengths, right? So what we're going to be doing is a brief presentation. Thank you. You can, just leave the one, that's right. We're going to have a brief presentation, then we're going to have a little chance for questions and answers, and then what we're calling design station activities, where we'll break into 4 or 5 groups and let you circulate around different stations. And then we'll have a little gathering at the end, assuming we have time. So our goals is, under contract, is to produce a master plan for what's currently called the Zero College Highway site. So that's identifying the desired uses. It's really trying to come up with an ideal layout for the different uses on the site. And then to think about how these relate to the future decisions that the town has to make, like zoning changes, if necessary, or the possibility of connecting to the sewer. Our timeline is basically starting a couple weeks ago. We started having meetings with the committee. This is our big initial public workshop. In March, we're going to meet with the committee, have some more work to look at concept plan alternatives. In April, we're going to come back for another public forum to which you're all invited to come see sort of different ideas. And the idea is not to sort of do all the planning and the analysis and just come up with one plan, take it or leave it. But what we'll be doing is coming back with a number of different alternatives for you and the project committee to look at and really test to see which one is better for everybody in the town. So we'll be coming back in April to do that. Then following that, we'll have another committee meeting. And then May, we'll be working on a final concept plan and some renderings of that. And then coming back sometime this summer to do a public forum, again, to which you're all invited to present the final results. So tonight, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the site, you've driven by it, but I'm not sure many of you really have walked the site and understand what's there. So we're going to try to give you a quick background of what's going on the site and around it. Some of you saw the model that we put together with the big aerial photograph. And then we'll be thinking about potential uses, your design preferences, kinds of housing, if that's appropriate for the site, and then really thinking about how can what the town does on this site enhance the other things in the neighborhood and the town at large. So what uses will really complement what's there, what kind of uses are needed, and how could they be arranged. So the site analysis is a photograph of the site in December. This is an aerial photograph, and You're familiar with this was farmland probably as recently as the 1960s or early 70s. It's gradually been growing in, but it's still quite a lot of semi-open land, especially up on the College Highway side. And then it's got, as you can see in the model and in this photograph, Lynn Drive curves up just to the south of the side. College Highway provides frontage. And then on the opposite side, the low side, it abuts the future rail trail. And this sort of shows the parcels around the site. This is another view looking at some of the protected land around the site, particularly the Fletcher Farm and some other farmland that sort of creates a green belt around this whole neighborhood. In terms of transportation, we've already heard a lot about concerns about how will traffic on this site affect traffic, or traffic generated by uses on this site affect traffic on College Highway. How will a new intersection affect sight lines and the process of going up and down the highway? But there are right now wide sidewalks and crosswalks with flashing lights that were installed a few years ago. There's some pretty good sidewalk connections that extend to Southampton Center and the Norris School where we are now. And then there's that dashed line at the bottom, which is the future Greenway on the opposite side of the site. In terms of land uses, as you know, the yellow, there's a variety of residential neighborhoods around the site. In orange, there's Paisanos and Cumberland Farms and some of the other retail uses. There's some office space, a few apartment buildings, and then the Norris School, which is in blue at the top of the slide here. And then the green is the protected land sort of surrounding the site. In terms of ecological resources, some of these are protected under state law, like there's a small area of wetlands at one corner of the site, and then the dashed line represents the so-called biomap, sort of critical natural landscapes, and this is areas that have been mapped by scientists at the state level to look at what's the most important land across the state for ecological value. And primarily it's the land adjacent to rivers and streams and ponds and the corridors that they create. And as you know, the Manhan River runs to the southeast of the site, and then there's quite a lot of open land going up the ridges to the west and north. In terms of water resources, this is a Zone 2 wellhead protection area, which is another sort of area we could spend 20 minutes just talking about protection of the wellheads. But what that requires, as you know, is it limits the number of, or the nutrient flow, the nitrogen flow from septic systems to basically one house per acre. So 4 bedrooms for 40,000 square feet. And that's the limit of the septic input that you can really provide. There is the possibility, which we'll talk about later, of connecting to the sewer system in Easthampton, and the town is in the process of studying that. In terms of the site, this is from our site walk. This is looking at the frontage along College Highway. It's quite a bit of frontage, and as you know, you come up a hill and turn the corner, and then as you do that process, you see what will become the future entrance of the site. It appears to be adequate site distance to create a new entrance there. So we're sort of taking that as a given for tonight's exercise, but it will be studied in detail before anything happens on the property. The front of the site is old fields starting to grow over. There's taller pine trees growing in the back of the site, dense sort of pine groves as you move down toward the south and east. And as you go down the hill, there's a mix of deciduous trees, oaks and maples, and young pine trees, but pretty much open and pretty easy to walk around. Again, this area was probably all farmland 50 or 60 years ago. And then you get to the bottom of the site. Basically, it drops off about 100 feet from College Highway down to the rail trail here. And this is basically follows the line north and south that you know is going to be the future route of the rail trail. And then beyond the rail trail, further to the east, it drops down to wetlands along the Manhan River. And this is apparent here. This is a map of slopes where the green is basically very flat land, and the orange and red are steeper slopes getting up to 30 to 50%. So there's basically a wide bench at the top of the property, probably 25 or 30 acres out of the total 45 or so of the site. And then it drops down sort of a steep bench. And then there's a flat land, again, that green area down at the base of the image here, which is along the curving line of the former railroad and the future rail trail. There is small areas of wetlands. They have been flagged on the site previously. So there's a corner down by the rail trail, which is officially designated wetland. And then once you get to the south of the rail trail, there's quite large areas of wetland along the Manhan River. So probably the only part that's really developable is the part to the north and west of the rail trail. This is soils on the site. I think probably any of you who live in this area know that it's really good soil. It's sort of a deep, good farmland soil with good drainage. And that's probably why there's so much development already in this neighborhood, because you could build homes pretty easily, and you could also build the septic systems to service those homes and apartment complexes. This is soil suitability for septic. So the green, sort of halfway through the site and going toward College Highway, is the best soil for septic disposal. The red, primarily because of the slope and increasing wetness toward the south part of the site, is less suitable. And then this is, you can't see it very well, but there's future, the potential connection for the sewer line would follow Gun Road from the neighborhood down toward a force main that would follow the line of the future rail trail. Zoning, of course, is a given. The site is currently zoned residential village, the bulk of the site, and then there's a commercial village in a strip about 300 feet wide along College Highway. The CV district allows two-family, allows town facilities. You need a special permit for a restaurant or office or multifamily, and a 25,000 square foot minimum lot size. The rear of the site, which is the residential village district, allows one-family homes. You could have a special permit for two-family and multifamily with a 30,000 square foot minimum lot size. And then it's all in the water supply protection district, which is probably the most limiting factor for future development. So tonight we're sort of starting with a very open, not a clean slate, but a pretty clean slate when it concerns potential uses of the site. We're taking as a given that this will be the location of the public safety complex. As you know, this was purchased at town meeting, and you heard a lot about the public safety complex, and that this is the sort of current plan for the complex. It's got a little bit more compact than it used to be. The pink toward the left side is mostly the fire department, and the blue on the other side is the police department space, and then there's some shared spaces in the middle. In terms of the sort of preferred site layout for the public safety building, this shows College Highway toward the top of the page, and then an entrance that would provide a sort of a wide driveway for the fire engines to come in and out that would come directly off of College Highway, and then there would be a separate entrance that would provide for access for the police department. So this is sort of an idealized plan if you built the complex all by itself, which of course is one option. So one of the things we want to talk about tonight is if it's not all by itself, if it includes other uses like the senior center and housing, what would be the best way to arrange it on this site? What uses might be shared, like open space, recreational areas, parking, and certainly we don't want to build more than one road if we don't need to. This is the second big use that's probably going to happen on the site, which is the senior center, and this is a plan that was done by Abacus Architects during their sort of feasibility study for the senior center last year. And they were thinking of a different site. They had a different site on East Street, I think, which didn't pan out because of soil conditions. And now they're very happy to be looking at the possibility of having it on this site, which does have good soil conditions. But it's basically a variety of meeting spaces, large function rooms, and offices, surrounding a large shared open space in the middle of the building. This is a rendering of a similar building that Abacus did in another town. The rail trail crosses the site, so connection to the rail trail is an important question in terms of uses on the site. Could you have parking that was dedicated for the rail trail? What's the best way to get from that parking lot to the trail itself, and so on? So that's a question. And other potential site uses are really going to be a focus tonight is, do we want to have commercial development to take advantage of the frontage on College Highway? Do we want to have housing on the site? The Housing Authority is very interested in building housing on the site, something in the order of 40 or 45 units. Beyond that, and where that occurs, we want to talk about, and if you could do housing beyond that, we want to talk about where that might go on the site and what it might look like. And a big reason for that, as you know, is that housing is becoming, in this whole region, not just Southampton, increasingly out of reach for people who are younger than most of us in this room, right? Our children are not able to find a house here the way we could when we were in our 20s and 30s. And the median price, as you see here, has gone from, $450 10 years ago to over $550 today. And we're not going to spend too much time on this, but there's a concept in planning called the housing cost burden. The idea being is you should be able to get housing and not spend more than 30% of your income. But in Southampton, if you look at the numbers, almost 25% of homeowners and 40% of renters are housing cost burdened. And part of the reason is there's not a lot of choices when it comes to housing in town. You have lots of beautiful single-family houses and not a lot of vacant uses and not a lot of multifamily uses. And that's one of the things we want to talk about tonight is how do we change, is it a good idea to change that balance? And how could housing on this site help make that better? So we want to talk about the vision for the future of this site, and that's really what we're going to do in a few minutes when we break into groups. I wanted to start by sort of introducing the different kinds of housing that we think are possible on this site and which could help fill that gap in the town. There's a concept called the missing middle housing, which is a thing that's really occurred nationally, where almost all of our housing is single family, some two family, in most towns in the Northeast. It's either single family or it's large apartment buildings. And we did that through zoning, and we did that because we could afford to build single family houses and most people could buy them. But what happened is if you only have very nice single family houses and big apartment buildings, you don't have anything in the middle for people who might want them. And that means our children, grandchildren, those of us who are looking to downsize from a big house and move into a smaller unit, people starting out in life, of course, coming into town. And there's this whole range of housing which we're going to look at, which we think could fit into sort of single-family neighborhood like this, but also provide more of that diversity that we really need if we want to keep our children basically in the town. So one thing is to, instead of a single-family house, is to build what's called a duplex, where you have two units that either share the same house, but you have one unit on the ground floor and one on the second floor, or as you see in the middle, one unit in the front and another unit in the back. And these are becoming more and more common, particularly because of the price of land. If you have to spend, how much do you spend for a building lot here? $100,000? $140,000. If you have to build, if you have to spend that much for a building lot, it makes sense to build a duplex. Or you could build something larger, which is a townhouse. Also, I think increasingly we're thinking of these as so-called manor house. And the idea being is that we're all familiar with big houses that extend, 5,000 square foot manors. These were built historically. They've also been built recently. And there's really no reason you can't build a townhouse with 4 or 5 units that looks like a big single-family house. And so that's kind of the idea with this manor house idea, or a more traditional townhouse, or in this case, townhouses that are designed to look like big extended farm buildings, right? They sort of have different wings connected, lots of peaked roofs and dormers and so on. But these are increasingly popular around the state as, again, kind of a really great fit for the need for missing middle housing. This is sort of typical sort of manor house, farmhouse style townhouse, but you can see there's a 4-unit building. Again, with the townhouses, you share the end walls, and then you have 2 floors yourself. It could be a 4-unit building, it could be a 3-unit building, or 5. But basically, a lot of developers now are taking advantage of sort of the traditional design ideas. If you have a big part of the house, there's that saying, big house, little house, back house, barn. There's no reason you can't have 5 or 6 different families living in that kind of a connected farm structure. And when you drive by, it looks like it's always been here. So that's an interesting possibility. And there's something called a sort of walk-up apartment or stacked flats. And this is just, instead of a townhouse where you own 2 or 3 stories yourself, what is you have the ground floor, there's another apartment on the 2nd floor, and then maybe another apartment on the 3rd floor. And again, these are some examples of trying to design a building that doesn't look like a triple-decker from Cambridge, but looks like it might be more appropriate for a small town. And the advantage of these, like the lower right-hand picture there is from Village Hill, just over the line in Northampton, is they're fairly narrow, and they sort of look like big single-family houses. They don't look like an ugly apartment building. And apartment buildings themselves don't have to look ugly. We've looked around the state, and there's a lot of people experimenting with apartments that really look like a collection of smaller buildings that happen to be connected together, right? They could be a large sort of manor house style, like in the upper left. I don't know, the lower right is kind of a ski chalet, or it could be kind of a shingle style building in the lower left. But there's a lot of design that you can do to make it feel like it fits in a traditional neighborhood, and it's not something like you see apartments out by the interstate. Here's an interesting example. This is in a new project that's still in permitting in Amherst. 31 units. They're also renovating as part of that an old school property. But it's a fairly large building, but it's broken up with different wings and dormers and porches. So again, it has more of the feeling of a single-family neighborhood instead of just an apartment building. Here's another one they're working on Belchertown Road in Amherst, which is 47 units. Again, they've divided the building up into a big sort of barn-like section, another section that's divided with different sort of dormers, almost bay windows, and then behind it there's a larger sort of expanse of apartment blocks, but it's hidden from the road and surrounded by this, which, I think, well, this is one of the questions that we want to ask you tonight is, do you buy into this concept that if it's designed well, maybe an apartment would be a good fit for this site? This is sort of what makes an apartment hard to design for a site like this, because it by definition has a central corridor with apartments on both sides, and it's quite a wide building, usually like 60, 65, 70 feet wide. So it's hard to make that look like a single-family structure unless you break it up like this and have enough of a roof, enough of a peak that really looks more like the proportions of a single-family houses that have been connected together. This is another thing we want to talk about, which is the possibility of mixed-use buildings. So these are all fairly recent constructions, mixed-use buildings with apartments on the upper floors and ground floor commercial. These are all in kind of village settings. The one in the upper right is part of the North Square project in North Amherst. It's quite a large, blocky apartment building, but they have attempted to put some peaked roofs on there. But what really makes it work is it's a mix of sort of lively uses on the ground floor, and you can go upstairs to your apartment. Across the street, there's shops and cafes and so on. So it's really the idea of sort of a traditional town center or village center, which happens to have a larger apartment building sort of built into it. Here's an interesting one. This is in Situate, but again, it's sort of a fairly large uses with apartment buildings in the rear and mixed use toward the front of the site, but broken up in sort of traditional proportions to look more like a traditional New England kind of use. And then the parking is tucked in between and around the buildings. So instead of a single giant parking lot sort of dominating what you see, it's the buildings, these nicely designed buildings, which is what really you see. And then the parking sort of winds between them. This is an interesting project in West Acton, which is it's on a state highway. They actually worked with the state highway to turn this into more of a main street with on-street parking and plantings and sidewalks. And then they built this new building, which along the street, it's a collection of sort of smaller village-scale structures. And then behind, as you can see in that aerial photograph, there's a larger building that sort of creates an entire complex out of that. And it's stepped down a slope with parking underneath. So it's a very efficient use of space, but what you see is a kind of a traditional main street with a crosswalk and bumps outs and parking, and then you walk into these nice plazas. So the feeling you get when you're in there is you really feel like you have come into a real village setting. And this is on the edge of an existing village in West Acton, but it used to be just the state highway blowing past. So they brought the village up to the highway, which slows people down, and they also modified the design of the highway itself, which further slows people down because there's parking along the edge and it's a little bit narrower than it was. I don't know if we're going to get too far in that discussion here, but it is a possibility, and I just wanted to show you that it's been done elsewhere. This is another project in Norton, Massachusetts, and these last two I want to show really are about the possibility of building something that's more than the sum of its parts, right? So much we have development where it just happens one piece at a time. So there's developer comes in, he puts up a convenience store. Somebody else comes in, puts up a little subdivision with some houses. Somebody else comes in and does an apartment complex, and none of it relates to each other. So you have the opportunity here, I think, as shown in these examples, of really building something which is more coherent, that is really has multiple different kinds of uses, but it's really designed around the idea of creating a real village setting that people can walk around, and it feels like you're actually arriving somewhere. You're not just popping into the convenience store to get some milk. You're coming to a beautiful center. So this is in Norton off of 495, but all this is new. There's a commercial building that they built up along the state highway, and then behind it, they have this wonderful green surrounded by townhouses. And this is from the air. You can see on the right-hand side the state highway. You can see a small commercial building. In the entrance, you come into that beautiful green, and it's surrounded by really nicely designed townhouses. And then behind that, there are alleys for parking. So the parking is not all out in front of the buildings. And it's sort of designed according to the traditional principles that you would think somebody designed it 150 years ago. And as a result, it feels like this is a nice place to live. But there's a lot there, pretty high density, a lot of different people coming in and out. But it's all been carefully designed to work well because it's all designed as one unit. And then, you have this wonderful, one of the concepts is you don't have a big yard yourself. You might have a little garden in front, a terrace out back, but the open space is shared by the whole community, which again is something, we've been doing in New England for hundreds of years. It's just after World War II particularly, we decided everybody should have their own open space and mow it every weekend with your lawn mower and pull up the weeds all weekend. And of course, a lot of us are looking to downsize to a place where we don't have to do all that work. A lot of our children and grandchildren are looking for a place where they can live in a real community and know other people and share these resources and not have to be slaving over their backyard. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about Village Hill in Northampton, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a former state hospital campus, which again was redesigned according to a master plan that brought lots of different uses together, but they all fit together because they're part of a consistent village master plan. So there's single family on one side, there's townhouses, which you can see in the middle there. These are connected buildings that are made to look like some kind of a farm structure. There's lots of little open spaces, and it's all very walkable and tied together. This plan shows the different uses that are mixed up. So there's single family around the outskirts in yellow, there's apartments in purple, and townhouses in orange, and then some larger, there's an assisted living facility in one of the old state hospital buildings. And all of this is about 30 acres, which just theoretically, you could pick this up and it would fit on the Zero College Highway site. Please keep in mind, we're not proposing that or saying you should do that yet. What we want to talk about in the next hour is, does anything like that make sense? And what are our priorities? Beyond our priorities for that site, what are the things we really want to explore? Because what we want to come away with tonight is sort of a list of things saying, oh my gosh, don't build this. And the select board will tell us what the sort of range of options are. So we want to know sort of what the options are that we're going to explore over the next month. Should we be looking at larger apartment buildings or some kind of mixed-use place or not? Should we be focusing only on a minimum amount of housing, and how much would that be, and who should it be for, and so on? So I am right on time, Dylan. What we want to do now is take a few minutes for questions, 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll break up into groups. And we have a mic that we can walk around with. Excellent. You're raising a hand.
And all of these, plans of all of the proposed or a potential of the Housing Authority wanted 40 to 45 houses being built on this property. Has anyone taken into account the stress that will put on the school that is about 20 kids to its max at the moment? Because if you're building affordable housing, people that are coming are going to be coming with kids, and that burden is now going to be placed on the school, which is currently at 480 and change children, and its max limit is 500. So what's your plan for that if that happens? Because there's already not enough money in the budget for the school, as I'm on the school committee, for the school that's here, and you're talking about bringing in 40 to 45 new families that potentially have, even if they just have one kid each, that's 25 kids over the max that this school can hold right now, and that's maxing out every classroom at probably 23 to 25 kids.
It's a really good question, and one which I think is on everybody's mind. Yeah, I didn't want to do the hour-long presentation, but it's been discussed, and it's, as any project that comes along, potential development project like this, impacts on town finances are a question. And I think in terms of our process, the idea is to figure out what's even possible on this site, how much could fit there, and then to work backwards, like I say, come back next month with several different options, and then get some idea of what the impacts of those different ones might be. So one option might be no housing on the site. Great. Another option might be 45, 50 units on the site. Another one might be 100 units on the site, which would probably depend on whether or not you could get a sewer connection. And then you look at those different options from lots of different perspectives. How much traffic do they generate? How many calls from the fire department and police are they likely to require? Though this is pretty close to the fire and police if they build it there. And then, of course, how many school children? I will tell you that this is the most common question at town meetings across Massachusetts whenever there's public housing or affordable housing comes up. And what we've discovered is that it's rarely as high as one student per unit when you have a typical sort of housing units, typically closer to 0.1 or 0.2 if you could believe that. Right, so that's the capacity of your, it's, yeah, if you couldn't hear, the point I think you're trying to make is that if you build housing here, it's going to attract people who already have kids in school through school choice, which may make the problem worse. Again,
at what point the school system will be included, or the school committee will be included in the discussion. I'm not saying none of this should happen. I'm just wondering at what point in the process the school committee, the principal, whoever is the person that needs to be involved, is involved in the conversation before you get to a point, I don't want to say of no return, but of it being a pain to, change the process.
right, yeah, obviously you and I'm sure others are concerned that this gets too far down the road and then you're stuck with the plan before people have asked the question. What I'm going to do is we'll put our heads together, talk to the folks from the town, and try to give you at least some sense of what the plan is to address that issue before we leave tonight.
So I have two questions, one of which is probably you'll be able to answer, and one that is maybe someone else's decision to make. The first one is if you do a mixed-use site, would the police and fire then have like a parking lot entrance that's like unique to them? So they're not going through, you know what I mean? Like if you've got children on a sidewalk and you got a fire truck trying to get out, I mean, that's what I'm wondering. So I'm assuming they would have their own in-out, and now you're talking about more than one drive. Is that correct?
I think the logical thing, and we'll talk about this when we gather around the model, is to have a main entrance road that would provide access probably to the senior center and any housing on the site, and then visitor parking for the public safety complex. And then there would certainly be probably a separate driveway for the fire department to get their trucks directly onto College Highway. That's what they've said is necessary.
Well, I would think so. That's
Yeah.
why I asked. And the second one is when we're talking about mixed use, have they discussed with you selling off parcels with stipulations to those parcels? I mean, we're not developing all this housing and everything ourselves, I assume. And then the town isn't going to become a landlord, so to speak. What's the plan with that?
No. Again, maybe we should, we'll get that answer straight and come back at the end to talk about what the possibility is for that. But what's typically done is the town will sell part of the property to a nonprofit developer like Valley CDC or Wayfinders, and they would build and manage the housing there. Some towns do build their own housing and manage it by their local housing authority. No one has talked about selling off part of the property just for private developers to build market rate housing or mixed use, but that is a possibility. I think what we really want to focus on tonight is what's the best fit in terms of uses on the site, how might they be arranged, how could they benefit the town, and then we'll figure out what are the impacts, what's the process for selling and managing that, and sort of all those logistical details. Yes?
In a way, this is a follow-up question to the one just asked. Given the financial pressures this town habitually faces, one of the things I've been wondering about is let's take as a given that we need a public safety complex and we probably need a senior center on the parcel. Okay, taking that as a boundary.
Use the microphone, yes.
Sorry, taking those as a boundary condition, what are the different kinds of revenue opportunities available to a town in this situation? That is one-time revenue from the parcel and or recurring revenue. Again, taking as a given that we're going to have to put a safety complex and probably a senior center there already.
So I think the answer to that question is, for tonight, it's identifying that generating revenue for the site as a priority for some residents of Southampton. Thus far in the process, we hadn't heard that. So we had a series of focus groups, and we didn't hear that this site should be used to generate revenue. So that's valuable input for us. And then if it is supported by a large percentage of the population, then that's something to explore further.
A couple more, and then we're going to break into groups, and we can talk more among the groups.
I would certainly be an advocate for affordable elderly housing. There are a lot of families in Easthampton that they can't keep up their homes anymore, and they want to stay in town. And that would solve the problem with the schools. So, because we wouldn't be putting any more children in the schools. It may cause a burden on the fire department and on the ambulance, but I would truly advocate for affordable senior housing. Looking at Lathrop community as an example, looking at Treehouse community in Easthampton as an example, where it's affordable. I don't know if Lathrop's affordable, but it's senior housing. And I think Southampton needs affordable senior housing.
Thank you. I work for a nonprofit, and I support those with disabilities. And I see a lot of diversity, and I go to a lot of towns. I cover Worcester West. And I just want to say what I see in these small apartments or apartments of people needing housing, where it's designated maybe 2 bedrooms, at most 3, there's 10 people living in that house or that apartment. And I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this is happening. It is cramming people into smaller spots because there is not enough housing, number one, but number two, what's going to stop it from happening if we build housing here that we're going to have is designated for a family of 4, and meanwhile we have 12 people living in it.
I always tell our staff, I always tell our staff that it's great to get the hard questions up front when you're just starting the process. So I appreciate those of you who come to ask some hard questions, because then we can start to think about, well, what does this mean for designing the future of this site? And we can make sure that that doesn't get forgotten. We're going to have 2 more.
I got a quick question for you. My suggestion is this. You got the plot plan of the land. You should have had a model of the safety complex that you could have pushed here, there, everywhere, or the senior center. And then if you put 1 or 2 family houses, whatever, where are you going to put it on the land? And the other thing you got to think about, okay, most people have 2 cars. So I don't care how many apartments you put in or whatever, you got to make darn sure you have parking for all the people. The other thing, I've been here for 30 years. They've been talking about sewers in this town for 30 years. We still don't have sewers, and I live right on Helen Drive. And they said the last time they were going to put sewers in, they couldn't hook it up to Easthampton. So now you're talking about putting in all these complexes in with sewers, with septic in there. Then you're going to have to change them all over the sewers. It's like you're putting the double cost.
Again, it's a really good question, and we're not advocating for putting a certain amount of housing on the site. Our job is to really, as I said, come up with different scenarios and look at what's possible, and then it'll be up to you, the citizens of Southampton, to make those decisions. Your first point, though, is a great segue to our next section, which is we actually have models cut out to scale of the police fire station and the senior center that can be moved on our big map of the site. So, glad we got that. One more question?
Well, it's not just one. I have gone to the select board meetings and have brought up several of the things that you've talked about. We have the potential of the sewer system coming down the Greenway. If we could hook that up to those 4 commercial lots on the very front. We would have revenues coming in, restaurant coming in, you've got meal tax, another convenience store, you have the lottery tax. There's a lot of potential that they say is not in the cards right now, because when they did the survey several years ago, fiber optics was the high thing. We all have internet connection right now. We don't have revenue coming in. If we can get commercial buildings on the front, then we would have revenue coming into this town. I highly agree with the older generation having housing for 55 and over. We're constantly being told 35% of the residents in this town are seniors. We're pushing them out of their homes. There's no reason that there shouldn't be something here affordable for them to go into that meets the requirements. My other question is, because the town owns this now, we could go by all these bylaws and the zoning changes. All these other developments that have tried to go in there have been shut down immediately. How's the town doing it?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is, are you satisfied with the current zoning and what the limitations of it are? Or do you want to look at other opportunities? And then if you want something different, then you have to figure out how to change the zoning and see if you have the votes to make that happen. I wanted to provide a little time now for anybody who wants to share their last thoughts for the night. Over here at this group, we talked about different types of people and their needs. Got a lot of great input about older adults and their needs for a senior center, their need for housing, the need for younger people for housing, for starter homes, for quality schools. Heard that there's a really strong interest in generating revenue from this site. There's a really strong interest in having a nice but not expensive restaurant in Southampton. So gathered a lot of input. We're going to process it and bring it back. But I wanted to make time for anybody else who wants to share their final thoughts for tonight. Anybody in the group here? Anybody want to tell us what you're thinking about, what you're taking home tonight? Nobody? You've talked out? What's that? It's not working. Any last thoughts, Peter?
Any last thoughts? Well, I thought this was really terrific discussion around the models. We've identified a lot of people are skeptical about the level of development that might be possible here. And as I said earlier, it's really helpful to have the hard questions up front so that we don't end up what I hate having happen, which is you come to town meeting with a proposal and then somebody stands up with a really good idea that we didn't think of, right? So it's really great that you were here to raise those questions. And then I think also, in addition to the hard questions, I think hopefully we opened some eyes about how much space there actually is on that site. There's a lot of room to do a lot of things, which gives you control over the future of where to build things that you may need, like housing. Of course, there's a question of the extent. I think most of you hopefully got the message that without sewer, you're fairly limited in the extent of housing you could build there. Probably going to be 40, 45 units, maybe up to twice that if you really stretched it and built two separate systems. So it's not from our perspective, it's not an overwhelming amount of housing. And then if you do get the sewer, there's a lot of space on that site where you could do a lot more of everything. And so the question going forward, and what we'll try to do, is explore a range of different scenarios that will let you see what fits on the site physically, and then we can break those down and see how would those affect the town for good or bad. How would those affect the neighborhood for good or bad? And then you guys get to make the decision. So stay tuned. We'll be coming back with that public forum in April.
It's 8:30, I don't remember.
At some time.
But there is a survey. There's a survey available, so please pick up a postcard and fill out the online survey.